So good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out on this rainy Tuesday evening. So my name is Charlotte Bonham-Carter. I'm an academic at Central St. Martin's here in London, and I've been asked to chair tonight's discussion, which I think is going to be very interesting. So we have here this evening a panel. We have Alex Seago, who is professor at Richmond University in London and has done lots of work and research on British pop art. So he's going to be speaking about primarily the work of Pauline Botti. We have Niyaz, who is one of our exhibiting artists. So very lucky to have Niyaz with us this evening from Paris. And we have some translation that might need to happen. And then we also have on our screen here, Natalia, who is the mother, it's the first time I've said this, the mother of one of our exhibiting artists. So that's Markus, who you may have read in the material, is just 12 years old. And I think Markus is there as well. Is that right, Natalia? And may pitch in and at least may say hello at some point. So whatever works for you. So we're going to have a short discussion about the exhibition. And then I will open it up to questions and give you an opportunity to ask our panel this evening any questions you may have. So what I'd like to do is to begin with each panelist maybe introducing themselves and saying a little bit about the work that we have on display here as part of this exhibition. So Natalia, if you can hear me okay, are you able to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Markus's contribution to this show? I think we need some sound.
Sorry.
Okay, while we try to connect to Natalia, Niyaz, we're just sorting this. Obviously, there's always technical problems whenever we try to do Skype. Are you able to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the work that's on display?
Меня зовут Niyaz Najafov.
My name is Niyaz Najafov. I'm a painter.
Я родился в Баку, в Азербайджане.
I was born in Baku, Azerbaijan, during the USSR.
Очень люблю свою родину.
I paint the motherland.
В последнее время я пытаюсь жить, работать в Париже.
And in the most recent time, I try to live in Paris and work in Paris for the past
9 лет и 3 месяца.
9 years and 3 months.
И пока еще работаю. Хочу. Нет, приятно представить. Про какую работу?
Which work would you like to hear about?
Maybe you could tell us, is this recent work, and is there a theme that unites the work that you are showing here today?
Если тогда здесь по-новому, здесь по-другому работает. Вот эта работа первая.
So they might not be new, but
200 лет назад.
They are new in one way or another. They're viewed differently in this exhibition. This one is, I think, one of his first ones. And that one for him personally is always new.
Я говорю, как я претендую на то, чтобы люди понимали некоторые мои объяснения каким-то фактам. И Вот, поэтому...
He says that his explanations, he sometimes wants the audience to view them as a fact. So he's not inventing something, but that's how he sees it.
Говорю так, как оно есть на самом деле, как должно быть.
And that's how he thinks it should be.
Датами определять как-то этой годичными не получается некоторые. Они новые всегда, то есть я так не буду делать.
He thinks that you should not be dating the works by a particular date, and that and that he's not intending to do so at any point. For him, they always occur as new, and he brought some pictures with him of his other works.
Работу я понимаю нормально, но у нее есть дата. У нее есть дата. Я могу сказать, какого она будет.
They do have dates, and he can say which dates. So he doesn't really like to show pictures, but in this case, so a lot of them are very current. I think that's what he's getting at. So we can actually show which ones he thinks are currently relevant to the discourses of nowadays. So, for example, these two. This one is quite current, but this one is slightly different than his usual style. And this one was created in Azerbaijan. And this one is also quite a timeless piece, in his opinion. Yeah. So this one as well. So some of them, as you can see, he's putting aside, not because he thinks that these are not right for this time, but these are.
And they're drawn from personal experiences or things that he sees, or what is the catalyst for these paintings?
Niyaz, а какой вот драйв за работами? Что вас наталкивает на вот такие?
А ничего не наталкивает, все наталкивает. Работать надо. А что еще делать?
He says that sometimes it's different ideas that have to make you work. Most of the time, it's his constant workflow. For example, you breathe constantly, you go to the bathroom constantly, so he says it's part of his lifetime. So for him, it's a strong force that he just has to go through.
Просто тяжело, а так как это надо же, конечно, героином станешь, но как бы это же приятно.
So similar like drugs, you sometimes have to take to make you happy, and it's almost like an addiction for him, painting. So he absolutely is completely moved with it. Можно пытаться, чтобы люди посмотрели, потом вернуть? Да. Да.
Геноцид какой-то. Ты вот так перемешать, теперь не
No, he doesn't want to give. So he doesn't want to give them separately. He wants to give them as a mix. And so to see, because I think a lot of them are going to be current at different times.
So one of the things that I see in these works is this very raw emotion, and it's not a surprise to me that Niyaz has described them in this way, that there's a kind of compulsion or an addiction to painting. That's a very beautiful way of understanding the process. I'm interested in this discussion to explore the similarities between the three contributors to this exhibition, because in many ways these similarities are not obvious. So I wonder, have we lost Natalia? Is that there? Okay, so perhaps we can move from Niyaz to Alex, who's going to say a few words about Pauline Botti. Then we'll hear from Natalia, and then maybe together we can try to make sense.
Natalia's back.
Natalia's back. Okay.
Yeah.
Natalia, can you speak? I don't think we can hear you. I don't think that's going to work, is it? You guys can't hear that. I can't hear that.
I could hear something.
I can hear something, but it's not enough for everyone else, I don't think.
Yes.
We got you. It always works eventually. Okay, so Natalia, you can hear us okay, is that right?
So if you can...
Oh, should I use this? You can hear us. You can hear us, okay?
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can just introduce the work that we have on display here. It's maybe the first time that we've encountered Markus's paintings. Can you tell us a little bit about the process and what we are looking at today?
You can all hear me, right?
Yes.
Great. The works which are presented are mainly his self-portraits, because that's his a way of introducing his strange world to us, as well as exploring the world, because how could you make research of something if you do not know something well? And actually, he doesn't know the society. That's why his main interest is himself. So that's why he paints himself in different ways, this blue Markus, for instance. So in the world of art, you can be everything. You're not limited by any standards or by any traditions or customs. So you can be absolutely free. And I think this is the main feature of what is presented today in Gazelli Art House.
Okay, great. Thank you, Natalia. And as I don't know if you heard me, but one of the things we'd like to tease out of this discussion is some of the relationships between the three artists in this exhibition. So by way of introduction, Alex, could you introduce the work of Pauline Botti and tell us a little bit about what we have on display today?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Oh,
yeah. No, I've got this one, I think, which is okay. I'm going to show a few PowerPoint thingies here, if I can get to the PowerPoint. Yeah. I'm not sure how much you know about Pauline Botti, but Pauline Botti was one of the very few women involved in the British pop art movement in the early 1960s. Her work was largely ignored or forgotten until David Mellor really sort of brought her back into the spotlight with the 60s art exhibition at the Barbican a few years ago. Sue Tate has written brilliantly about Pauline Botti. So really, I'm repeating a lot of what Sue Tate has said here. Pauline Botti was at the Royal College of Art between about 1959 and 1961. So she was there at the same time as the famous British pop artists like Hockney, who everybody's heard of course, Derek Bossier, Peter Phillips, Alan Jones, those people who everybody associates with the British young contemporaries. She also featured in the Ken Russell film Pop Goes the Easel. And that's where I'd really like to start, because if you've seen the Ken Russell's film Pop Goes the Easel, there's a very telling moment when Peter Blake, who is rather like the kind of grandfather of British pop art, along with Richard Hamilton, although they're very different types of character, is sitting next to Pauline Botti, kind of saying to Pauline Botti and looking at Pauline's collages, which are over here, sort of saying, and what does this mean, Pauline? And what does that mean, Pauline? And it's very different approach that's taken in the film towards the male artist. And this really shows you actually some of the issues that make Pauline Botti so interesting from a cultural historical point of view in terms of pop art. As you can see, I mean, Pauline Botti was an extremely attractive woman. I mean, she died very, very young at the age of 28 in 1966. And this was a kind of blessing and a curse for her, really, because she worked, Lawrence Alloway once talked about British pop art as working across what he called the long front of culture, rather than the traditional pyramidal hierarchical shape of culture with, say, opera at the top and rock and roll at the bottom. Alloway talked about this new front of culture where you had, if you like, low culture on one side and high culture at the other. And pop art was this new form of art which merged somewhere in the middle. Now, unlike the other male British pop artists, Pauline Botti actually worked across the long front of culture. She was an intellectual. She was very well-read in philosophy and was a film historian and was extremely kind of, on the ball when it came to contemporary philosophical trends. But she was also really prominent in the world of what you might call swinging London. She was a dancer on the set of Ready, Steady, Go, the first Ready, Steady, Go, which was one of the key pop programs on the TV in the 1960s. She was a kind of face around swinging London. And I think one of the reasons why she's been marginalized, and in a sense this show is about artists on the fringes, was the fact that she really was never taken entirely seriously by the contemporary art scene at the time. Partly because, at the Royal College, you had a very conservative and traditional art department, very tweedy, I would describe it, who regarded the pop art generation. Well, I mean, for, the tutors in the fine arts school at the time described the pop art generation as the worst students they'd ever had at the Royal College of Art. And Botti, who wasn't even in the painting school, was in the School of Stained Glass, was definitely regarded as somebody even further out on the edges. But actually now, from a contemporary perspective, you actually see Pauline Botti as somebody who really was a key figure in British pop art, and also very important as a kind of proto-60s feminist. I mean, a lot of her work was dealing with the same themes that people like Germaine Greer were dealing with later on. She was, her work was explicitly sexual. She dealt a lot with female desire. Her work was very avant la lettre, in a sense. And you see this increasingly. I mean, this is a front cover of Art magazine, which we were just talking about, from 1960, featuring Brigitte Bardot. And Botti was known as the Wimbledon Bardot when she was at the college. So she was, so definitely a face. But again, if you've been reading recent stuff about how Brigitte Bardot's been reflecting on her career, a similar kinds of problems affected Pauline Botti in terms of kind of being an object of desire and not taken seriously in terms of her, political and philosophical opinions. This is Arc 33 from 1962, which features a kind of a rave across the channel on a cross-channel ferry, which was very much, it's a photographic it's a photographic issue, but it definitely is a kind of male gaze. A lot of the British pop was based on this kind of male gaze. This is Peter Blake's Girly Door from 1961. And the reason I'm showing you this is it's very interesting to compare Peter Blake's idea about women in pop culture to Pauline Botti's view of women in pop culture in 1965. This sort of proto-feminist piece called It's a Man's World, where on the left you have this kind of soft porn image of women. On the right you have the male gaze. Okay, or her comment on the Profumo affair in 1963, okay, immediately kind of, if you like, sympathizing with the position that Christine Keeler was in, which was nobody else was doing at that time in the art world. I mean, Christine Keeler was sort of regarded as, a sort of a figure of the lascivious male gaze. I mean, Botti's view is very, very different. And also I think one of the things that makes her, if you like, the British counterculture, before the counterculture became prominent in magazines like Oz and things like that, was her completely out front attitude about female desire. I mean, this, with love to Jean-Paul Belmondo, who was a, French New Wave film star. And she says some hilarious things about him, like, when she writes about this, she says, oh, slurp, slurp, love, love, Jean-Paul Belmondo. And she appeared also, though, in one of the first episodes of Ready, Steady, Go, alongside of Cathy McGowan, who was the main presenter of Ready, Steady, Go, who was also a friend of hers. So she was kind of moving between this world of fine art and pop TV. And this is her in her studio with this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Those of you who ever watched Ready, Steady, Go, did any of you ever watch it? Yeah, it used to start off with the Manfred Mann song, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which was an organ song. And she translates that into a painting about the female orgasm, right? So if you look at this, you'll see 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 on here, O, 4 and F, right? So that's very, I mean, at that time, that was really quite far out. I mean, she was really at the, if you like, at the sort of cutting edge of a new kind of openness about sexuality and desire. And I think if she'd survived, she would have been a key figure in the 60s counterculture, a key political figure and a leading feminist. Anyway, I rest my case.
Thank you, Alex.
All right, yeah.
A point I'd like to pick up upon that you've made is this idea of marginalization. Mm. So perhaps that is an interesting thread that maybe runs throughout this exhibition. So Niyaz is a self-taught artist with a background in the military, and obviously Markus is still only 12 years old, and we know that Markus is also autistic. So my question is, what relevance does the personal story and the personal experience, and in this case, particularly maybe challenging circumstances, have to our understanding and our reading of the work? So I'm wondering, Natalia, if you could hear that question, maybe we could start with you. We need to know Markus to understand and appreciate his paintings.
Well, I think there must be some kind of understanding of a different person. So getting an education for people like Markus can be very hard because mainly they do not like copying because they do not take it. They do not take an example as something available, and this is normally how education goes. So you are inheriting it from the previous generations, for instance, so mainly you need to understand this. But there is a saying: if you know one artist, only know one artist. So there is no general story about them. So with Markus, it's the same. You need to know him. One of his main features is, as I've already said, painting himself and painting Mama, because these are the two people who are existing in his world, in fact. And that's what forms his attitude to everything. So sometimes you can see his portrait with long hair, and I think it is most of the self-portrait. So, and I think most of the time it is also influenced by Mama. So that was what forms his inspiration, if it's possible to say so.
This is maybe a question I'd like to ask each of the panelists, but Alex described how Pauline's work, and in fact some of her ideas, have been overshadowed by fascination with her beauty, her life. She died very early, a kind of tragic ending. Is there a danger that Markus's, being so young, and is there a danger that his life story in some ways overshadows our appreciation of the work?
I think this danger exists. Yeah. And for a very long time, I tried to hide this. So, and still, day when we are sending our works to open calls, I did not mention how young he is, and I for sure did not mention what kind of disease he has. And because I want him to be appreciated as an artist and not as a special person. And I'm very happy that it works, that his works are taken to the exhibitions with adult artists who are typical, let's say, health. And but in Russia we say you cannot throw the words out of the song. So that's the thing. This disease forms Markus's views, and perhaps it makes no sense to run away from the story all the time. So I'm trying to find this very thin line, which is good to talk about it and which is not good to talk about it. But I'm on the way still.
Thank you. And I hope I'm not pressing you on this, but I find it very interesting. Is there something political in the personal? Do you feel that in presenting Markus's work, in us having this conversation here in a gallery in central London, that Markus represents a different perspective on young people with autism, on young artists living outside the center of the art world? Is there a political component or an activist component or a desire to change common perception through this work?
Well, let's say my first motivation is to show his works because I extremely like them. So all the projects which he creates, let's say they're kind of a game for him. So it's not a conceptual art where he's sitting for months and thinking about a very great idea and then expresses it. So it's a bit different approach. But the things which I see, I really feel like sharing with everybody in the world because I see art in this. And, not only the artwork forms the artist, but also the attitude of him. And I can see other people who find him very interesting as well. So this is my first motivation. But on the other hand, I don't know how it's going on in England. In Russia, it is extremely very difficult to be any special in the art. Let's say do not have institutions which are working with special people as artists. And I have to fight a lot to make Markus go into some institutions where normal people have a chance to go. So it is a little bit a manifest as well. So this weekend, Markus participated in Sotheby's auction. That was extremely great for us because it means that special people can also be appreciated. And I want to talk about it in Russia openly. And I'm hiding that this is a little bit of manifest in this as well.
Thank you, Natalia. I'd like to ask the same question of Niyaz. How important is your personal story? I understand, you are a former soldier, self-taught artist. Do we need to know this in order to appreciate your work? And is there any danger that, our fascination with you somehow overrides our ability to look at your work as an independent art piece?
Она спрашивает, насколько важна ваша личная история, например, то, что вы были в армии, насколько важна ваша бывшая история.
В армии все были,
He says everybody was in the army. He says the age that I am, even in England, at my age, everybody was serving. And in France, only recently, they cancelled the army call. So for him, it's something motherhood that you have to do for the motherhood. And he said, if I get called again, I would probably do it again. А как вот стоит ли вашу работу рассматривать с точки зрения того, что вот с точки зрения вашей личной истории, как вы сделали эту работу?
Это старая поговорка дурацкая, еще в автобусе, на улице наступили на ногу, когда идешь в мастерскую рисовать, повлияет же по-любому.
He says, so it's a very interesting example how something even as basic, like for example, if you're going to paint to your workshop, somebody steps on your foot, it already influenced you as a human being. So he says that it influences perspective, but you're still going to go and create that work.
Камнем сейчас в стекло вот это бросить, я не знаю, бронирование повлияет же.
So he says, like, even for example, if I throw a stone at a window, it will influence. If I wipe the window, it will influence. So it's basically like a rippling.
История, не история, но это все-таки не стекло, я понимаю, ну как бы.
He says, I'm not glass, but I'm a live object that needs eating and needs caring for.
Вот, а просто так, если взять, что, как сказать, отдельно там, да, используешь просто инструмент, который жизнь тебе дала в ситуации. Я немножко так.
But if you look at it separately, life has given you instruments, and you have to use them. And he sometimes treats it with sarcasm. But for you to have the instruments, you have to create them yourself. And then it's your choice after that whether you want to use them or not use them.
Хороший пацан всегда в канители, потому что ты всю жизнь ты должен быть самим собой, в какую бы ты ни попал ситуацию. И вот это твое, оно должно быть как бы такое, не то что неизгибаемое там или не, ну просто твое и все, там с тобой просто могут уничтожить.
He says no matter what situation you're in, you have to be yourself. Even if they try to destroy something, you have to stick your ground and kind of keep it what you think is right.
Всю свою жизнь я в каких ситуациях не был, я встречал замечательных людей, вокруг меня были люди, я был вокруг очень замечательных людей, в любой обстановке в моей жизни.
He says that he's always been around quite wonderful people, very special people, and he was lucky to have them.
Ну, как бы там все сейчас это басни, там спортсмен, там и наркоман, и, там, и я сидел, и я охранял, там, я не знаю, и все было, да?
So of course he has the backstory. Such as, oh, I was a sportsman, I was in the army, I used to do drugs, I got arrested.
Но всегда вокруг спортсмен, там все,
but at the
на
same
улице
time,
просто.
You end up within the same
Люди,
environment
которые
of
нарушали
people.
закон, нарушали плохо закон, совсем плохо.
So the people who break the law, even,
мы же рассказываем про Робин Гуда.
You're still talking about them. Such as he gave a great example of Robin Hood. So despite him being in a way an outlaw, it doesn't mean that it has to be a bad person.
Вот у меня всегда вот вокруг меня были очень порядочные люди.
So he said, no matter what kind of people I was surrounded by, they were always very righteous.
Не просто, на мой взгляд, но человеческая вот эта основа.
Not only in his opinion, but as
human
beings.
Каждый занимался своим делом.
They were just doing their own thing.
Вот и все.
That's all.
Поэтому все инструменты, как говорится, я теперь если использую, что-то получаю, добиваюсь чего-то.
And that's why when he uses his instruments,
а потом становится мне не просто скучно, а просто я вижу, что я не умираю, но никак я не сдохну, поэтому приходится залезать в какую-то ситуацию. А в какую ситуацию можно? Ну, какую вы можете представить ситуацию, когда можешь залезть, например, просто? В метро без билета. Зачем?
That you're trying to enter a situation and what forces you to enter the situation. Such as, for example, trying to ride the tube without a ticket. So what would put you to do that situation? To be in that situation?
Собаки нападают с полицией.
Do we need to know about Niyaz in order to appreciate the work? And I think maybe you need to speak just a little bit louder.
Yeah. Yes, of course.
Maybe direct it out that way. I know you have a tough job.
No worries. Она спрашивает, нужно ли знать, какой вы человек, чтобы как бы любить вашу работу?
Я какой человек?
Да.
А у меня родная сестра говорит, Нiyazик, тебя надо очень сильно любить, чтобы любить вообще.
He says that even about, especially like to admire and love his work. Even his sister says, yes, you're a very special person. And
так не сказала, она говорит, просто ты такой человек, что люби.
He's like, you're such a person. We have to love you, but love you very strongly to love you. which is quite difficult to explain. So he doesn't think it matters if it's bad or good. He doesn't think that it's something that is somebody else's business. So he just works and lives and he exists in this environment. But then obviously the external is something else. Yeah.
So I think there's something in the work you're looking at today that implies, and I take the point, I mean, all artists are influenced by the set of experiences that they have, but it seems that the work that we're looking at, perhaps there are particularly challenging circumstances. Is there something about difficult circumstances that is necessary? I mean, it's the oldest sort of tortured artist. Is that necessary to produce good work? Or to put it in a different way, and this is maybe for everyone, is this work a result of overcoming challenges? Maybe, Natalia, we could start with you in that one. Is the work a response or a way of overcoming difficult circumstances?
Well, in our situation, everything is very easy. It's just a game for Markus. He doesn't take it as... I don't know how to say. You've just seen him. He's very positive, and he's positive all the time. So sometimes when I see some of his works which look gloomy or somehow sad, I'm amazed that he's doing them because he's always in such a great mood. But I very often can see some kind of a problem in his works. So perhaps this is something subconscious is working there, and which helps him to communicate with the world, with our world through his paintings. So perhaps partially it is like that. So he feels that he's different. He feels that he's not a part of our community. I don't know if he wants to be, or if he wants to be part, or if he wants to share part of his world with us. But that's what I see. It's like an open door. And I cannot say if it helps to overcome, but at least he's getting absolutely realized. So normal people, usual healthy people, normally demand a lot from him. And he can hardly be, let's say, good for teachers, for therapists, and for other people. And he knows it, that he's very often criticized for not being able to do what we can. But in art, he's doing very good. And there he's getting appreciated. And this helps him a lot. So I think in this way, he's kind of overcoming the problem that he has.
And you've pointed out something which is very interesting, that the paintings, and if you haven't had a look, obviously, please do have a look, but the paintings themselves are actually quite a bright colour palette, and there is a sense of optimism about them. So sometimes that processing, maybe this sort of fantasy of the tortured artist is a bit lazy. You know, sometimes this is actually quite an enjoyable, optimistic process. But I'd like to put the same question to you, Alex. You outlined very, very clearly, and it's very interesting to understand how Pauline Boty was marginalized in her time. How much was her work a response to the masculinity of pop art and the male-dominated? How much of that was she responding to, or how much of that is our reading many years later?
Well, I think she was marginalised in the art world, but she was also absolutely at the epicenter of what you might call the early years of swinging London. So, I mean, a lot of people would have really envied Pauline Boty. You know, she was on the pop programs in TV. She was acting. She was doing the graphic design for the Royal Court Theatre. You can see if you watch Pop Goes the Easel, she's absolutely at the center of the RCA social scene as well. She was an incredibly popular person. the big problem for her was being taken seriously by a rather, well, extremely patriarchal art world at that time, which is still very patriarchal, but boy, was it patriarchal in the early 1960s. And that was a source of frustration for her. And I think that it was very difficult. I think one of the things was that she found it very difficult to find people who took her seriously as an artist and an intellectual because of the way she looked. You know, and I mean, some people might say, well, you know, other people have much bigger problems than that. But I mean, she was a key figure in the early 60s. And probably, I mean, my feeling is, and I don't know if Sue Tate would corroborate with this, is as feminism developed, as the 60s went on, she probably would have become a much more central figure. But because she died so young in the 60s, it was really before the British feminist movement really, you know, developed its own voice. You know, I mean, if you like, second wave feminism developed its own voice, and I think she would have been at the forefront of that. And I think that by the late 1960s and 70s in particular, she would have become an absolutely key person, but who knows, you know.
Well, one of the interesting things about this exhibition is not only are we looking at quite, in many ways, disparate work, we're also looking at different generations. So Pauline Boty, you know, being primarily active in the 60s, how is the reception of her work? I mean, we were speaking earlier that there's a sort of renewed interest in Pauline Boty's work. How is the work being received now, and do you think she is being taken seriously?
Well, I think there's a lot of interest in her amongst, you know, a kind of, you know, younger generation of artists, but she's still looked down on a bit by older male art critics. You know, I won't mention specific names, but quite a few prominent art critics have said, oh, you know, the only reason that Pauline Boty was famous was because she was a, you know, a dolly bird in the 1960s. And her art really wasn't much good. But I think that recent exhibitions, particularly the one at Pallant House and the one at Wolverhampton, attracted a lot of interest. And I think that a new generation are really regarding her as an absolutely key figure that presaged many of the things that happened later in the late 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. But it's very, very sad that she died so young, because it was really a kind of unfulfilled talent. I mean, I think also you can see, if you talk to people like Derek Boshier and people like that, they really admired Pauline Boty. I mean, she had a lot of admiration from her peers. I mean, she was, I think amongst that group of, you know, young contemporaries, they liked Pauline Boty and they thought her work was good. I mean, Ken Russell wouldn't have featured her, I think, if it hadn't have been for that, you know. And I think if you watch Pop Goes the Easel, you can see that the direction she was moving in, she would have probably moved into film. She probably would have, I mean, there's a very interesting sequence in it, which is based on a recurring nightmare she had, which is shot in the old television centre, which is a bit kind of Hitchcockian and actually probably the strongest part of the Pop Goes the Easel film. You can see her talent, it shines through there. You know.
You've been talking quite a bit about the biography and in many ways our conceptual understanding of these works. So I just want to address them on a formal level as well. Again, you know, we're in this room naturally seeking connections between the works and thinking about how all of this hangs together. I mean, we're primarily looking at painting. So again, Natalia, maybe I could begin with you. Why the medium of painting? And maybe there is something about painting that we, you know, it's so visceral, we sort of naturally see it as an expression of the self. Does Markus work in any or is there something, any other media, is there something about painting that he's drawn to?
Well, I think painting is a very easy means to create the world you want to see. So as soon as you have a canvas and paint, you can do whatever you want. It's like absolute freedom. And that's why Markus likes it so much. But nowadays, not only painting, but any kind of digital gadgets give a chance to be free as well. So Markus works in really a lot of media. So he makes digital carpets. So he makes pictures for carpets and he prints them. We print, of course, together. But anyway, so he does a lot of photography. He does video art. He works a lot with bleaches, and he creates media objects and kind of big installations. So he's doing objects, but most of the time, if we're talking about painting, then he's depicting me or himself. But with any other media, his favorite approach is to get rid of meanings. So, for instance, he makes soap. It is a transparent soap which looks like soap and smells like soap, but inside, instead of herbs, he has nails, or he has pencils, or he has weird objects, because then he's using soap only as a capsule for keeping something important for him. So, or for instance, he takes toys, paints them this way that you cannot recognize the toy. So he's getting rid of the meanings, notions, which we normal people normally put into some, let's say, into some objects which we got used to. So art gives him a chance to be very free, but still painting is a very important part of his life, and I can see that he's kind of relaxed. Drawing and painting gives him some kind of energy, and they're much more, how to say, I see a lot of soul in what he paints. Though it's so easy, you can see that his technique is really very simple. But maybe, as you said, the colors that he chooses and the topics that he chooses, really, he talks to all of us.
Thank you. And it's a very beautiful conception, painting the world that he wants to see. I like that. So maybe the same question to Niyaz. I mean, the paintings, the texture of the paintings, it's very emotional, it's very... the color palette is very dark. It's immediately quite impactful. Why the medium of painting, and what is it about painting in particular that you are drawn to as a means of expression?
Написанию картин как представление художественного.
Не знаю, мне нравится. Я просто мой материал масло, холст.
He says it's something that he likes, the material, which is the oil and the canvas, the paper and the cardboard.
Там вот работа есть одна, наверху висит, она из кусковых таких, ну не из кусковых соединений, потому что материала не было, мешковины. Я жалел, отрезал, я потом из них стал переплетать, не сшивать, а переплетать, знаешь, вот так, а потом вот так. Вот, и кошмаром получился, а потом просто... начал на них рисовать.
Upstairs, there's, for example, a work on burlap, and you can see that it's cut up, and that's because he didn't have enough material. So even when he was creating the canvas, he was trying to be quite scarce about it, and that's why the pieces are quite small. And he didn't tie them up not to lose the texture, but he actually interwove them together. And he thought that at the time they were quite rough and ugly, but it's not actually that, and it was out of necessity that this was made. But then once he got the canvases back, he saw himself being drawn towards something like create a canvas, or sometimes a blank piece of paper. So it really depends what draws him in.
Единственное, что мне все время, я никогда не могу работать на чистом, на белом. Это очень редко, нужно по пальцам, как называется, посчитать раз 10 что-то у меня. А так обычно, чем вот гажий материал, да, мне легче использовать. Если вот у меня очень первый слой хороший, я имею в виду, я просто на краску размешиваю, кладу, высыхает, потом на нем работаю. Если он вот, ну я понимаю, что там вот эта все фигура поймана, там ничего даже не надо, там 2-3, никогда я все равно работаю под откос.
He says that he very rarely works with, like on a blank canvas, so he always puts a very rough underlay of paint on them and then paints on top to create the narrative. So when he was doing these quite perfect canvases from scratch, he actually didn't like them, and that's why most of them he hasn't even kept. But even if you see in these works, most of them have black paint or brown paint underneath.
Это не от этого, я не знаю, зачем я делаю, откуда я знаю, просто, а как нарисовать, какого цвета рисовать?
And paint-wise, he doesn't know what he's going to paint at which time, so he just takes the paints that are there in a way that are available in the color species. It's more like he doesn't plan in advance. That's the thing. He doesn't. It's not like he's steering a plane where you have to have specific instructions, where you have to kind of abide the rules. Here, you can just take a canvas, take the paints, and combine them together. When he was trying to plan, nothing actually came out, which is why he decided not to work like this.
Там многие, когда просто я знал, что получился, я хорошо я остановился просто. Еще бы один мазок, и все бы ушло бы все нафиг. Положил, но теперь надо ждать, пока там Марс оранжевый с индийской, желтый, там вот все канитель пойдет, если испортить. Ну, это я тебе написал.
Basically, he says there's a very fine line as well when he creates, where once you put in a certain color at a certain point, you might actually ruin the work. So that's why he despises the fact that you have to pre-prepare and pre-prepare particular paint. Yeah, of course, you have to train yourself to create the subject.
Потом эта работа, она уже не моя, я сказал, эта работа у меня это год, там какой-то, но она никакая вот, что она потому новая работа.
But then it no longer becomes my work, and it doesn't have a specific year for that reason, or specific kind of period, which you were asking about before. Yeah.
So it's interesting that somehow the limitations, sort of embracing these limitations or chances kind of become part of the artistic process. I also noticed that some of the paintings are completed over a period of years, and that's interesting. Does he dip in and out of a painting, or how does that work? You know, he works on a few paintings at the same time.
Она заметила, что некоторые картины были нарисованы на протяжении нескольких лет. То есть это из-за того, что вы работаете на несколькими картинами одновременно, или из-за того, что нужно было?
Нет, было несколько так, что выставка, люди мне брали сразу по моей просьбе материала очень много, то здесь надо работать 30 приблизительно, да, ну приблизительно так.
So
то я, да, ты переводишь и да.
Sometimes when you have an exhibition, you know that you have to create, for example, 30 works or a fund, and you know that there's this particular amount.
То, соответственно, я где-то стараюсь попросить, люди понимают, идут на встречу, они понимают, то есть это не потому, что там выпендриваюсь или как-то что-то, я там зажму потом этот материал, там, ну, если даже там остаете, как малирую там эти, да, как.
So sometimes you have to ask for the amount of material that you would have to work with,
пару тюбиков поставить, я сам докупаю потом. Я уже вхожу в эту. Ну, да, надо работать. Я обычно прошу, ну, минимум хотя бы еще 20, ну, 30. И умоляю до последнего. И человек, который меня знает, он понимает, что это мне не это. А тогда будет просто лучший результат будет выбрать из чего. Я не могу.
And sometimes you need to even help yourself and go buy more material to actually produce. So the more that he produces, he thinks he is better.
Я из-за того, что очень боюсь работать, поэтому у меня получается так, что я только в количестве, потом, например, там в 200, там, я понимаю, что одна работа получилась. А вот та работа, я не имею в виду, что она получилась, просто она вот такой момент, а если вот получилось. Она какой размер, там, на чем она мне вообще безразлично. И что я с ней сделал, тоже безразлично. Но я понимаю, что это моя работа, это мой щит и меч, я художник, я имею право в лекции вот так разговаривать. Вот то, что я сейчас сказал, многие я ему не сделал бы так, я вообще так не смог разговаривать.
And at times, you have this fear where you produce a certain amount of works, and maybe one of them will be successful, but you still need to produce this amount of works.
Сегодня уже ничего не получилось ночью.
And even the one...
Это моя работа, которую я делал. Но не получилось. Так, сделал, один цветок вроде, можно там что-то махнуть на вот там поворот. И все. Я за техникой я не понимаю, как я определяю, получилось, не получилось, но в принципе со мной люди согласны, это подтверждает много, и вот сегодня приходили люди, да. Я думал, к сожалению, на плохая одного человека не зал, другой Маркус. Совершенно люди, которые там. И вот в Париже человек меня на улице увидел просто цветы мои. Я стоял, издевался над людьми. И он реально, он так меня взял, он сразу покупает 2 работы, я ему 3 дарю с подписью. И вот так завязывается. Вот сейчас до того, что он присылает, там человек приходит, здоровается и так далее, что-то хочет даже купить. То есть вот это я имею в виду, да, то есть я чувствую, то есть ты понимаешь, что тебя там не то, что не понимают, а мило сколько меня терпит, да, элементарно взять.
So sometimes what he says, you can work all night and then one work comes out and that's the work that is actually, he thinks he's perfect, but he doesn't have any particular understanding of when and how he knows when the work is good or where the work is bad and which ones get rejected. So even the one upstairs, for example, he didn't expect it to turn out good, but it is his work and he has to assume the ownership of that piece because he thinks it's actually quite a good piece. And what he was saying, he sometimes creates these, I would say, guerrilla installations in Paris, where he pastes his flowers on the street. He says it's not an installation, it's a process. So it's the process of painting. So when he puts them on the street, sometimes people obviously look at them and they get intrigued, and sometimes they hate them, and sometimes they love them. And that's how he often builds a connection with the people around him, because they get interested and they ask more about his work. So that way. He says he doesn't care what they think when he's pasting, but because they don't really care why he's pasting.
Okay, I'm going to move on. Just one more question for Alex before we open it out to the audience. Thank you. Just again on this question of media and maybe just a formal consideration. In the show here we have a stained glass piece, we have a drawing, painting. Did Pauline Boty work across this range of media, and presumably this is indicative of her sort of peer group, or right. What is the significance of the range of media that she...
Well, when she was at Wimbledon College of Art, she was advised not to apply for the painting school because it was considered at the time that it was too difficult for a woman to get into the painting school, right? So she didn't apply to the painting school. She got in to do stained glass, which is pretty typical at that time. I mean, it was a very sexist environment. But one of the key things to understand, I think, about pop as it developed at the Royal College was the fact that the painters shared the same social space as students from lots of other disciplines, particularly graphic design. So the graphic designers and the painters were often using the same equipment and walking through each other's studios at the back of the V&A and being far more influenced. So this is one of the things that makes the Royal College very different from, say, St. Martin's, where sculpture was much more important. The sculpture people were much more isolated at the RCA. There was that big interaction between graphics, which Pauline Boty worked in quite a lot, and in the painting school. The other interesting thing was that when she was there, quite a few of the graphic designers who worked on ARC were moving over to work in television set design, because this was the beginning of ITV. And because TV was still black and white, there was a big demand to make the TV sets much more lively. So quite a few of the people that I interviewed when I was doing my work were saying, well, we could see big chances in television, So people like Ridley Scott, who was there at the same time as Pauline Boty, and Terry Green, and these kinds of people who were involved with ARC and knew Pauline Boty, were moving over into that world of independent TV. And many of them got their start doing commercials for ITV. So there was this long front of culture. There was this sort of elision between high culture, low culture, commercial TV. Pauline Boty worked in theatre, she worked in film, she worked in painting. She did a lot of collage. She was working, in a way, collage was the key medium because collage automatically brought together the high and the low. And if you think about Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which probably is the sort of key pop moment of the 60s, it's a collage. And Boty was involved, as you can see here, in collages going back a long way before that. So that collage aesthetic, moving between the high and the low, moving between media, moving between new media like television, traditional media like painting, that's absolutely key for understanding British pop. And also pop music, of course, which became more and more and more important, and she was involved in that scene too. So.
Great. Well, thank you for your contributions. I think it's a good moment to open it out to the audience and see if you have any questions for the panelists, either the panel as a whole or anyone in particular. Yes?
I'd love to ask you about this painting. And generally also whether your paintings come from a story, something in your mind, an experience, or whether they emerge.
This particular work, or just generally? Например, вот это.
Не то, что например. Вот хороший вопрос, вот так, как снайпер.
It's a good sniper question, he says.
Нет, серьезно, не так пойму, то есть, потому что это мухобойщики. Вот у меня есть работа, она меня преследует, вот как бы, она вот с мухами, да, и там невозможно сказать. Как бы вот столько мухобойщиков и ни одной мухи, да. Может, они просто маленькие мухи, мы просто не видим.
These are fly swatters, and it's something that, and it's something that haunts him because you don't see the fly, or maybe they're very little and you can't see them. And he was trying to do the work, and he was twisting it around and changing and looking at the ceiling, and it seemed very weird to him. But then at the same time, he just realized that the fly was hidden, and that's why he thought it was a good work.
Did the work emerge, or did he have this?
То есть эта идея была, сценарий вот этот?
Идея. Мухи. У нас на балконе мухи. Я не знаю, по мухи.
Says on the balcony he just had flies at some point, and you go out and you start finding them. So that's why he has a lot of works that have the fly swatters in the hands, such as this one as well, including the little one. So it's not one direct idea, but it's something that exists in his environment. Now there's less flies though. In Paris, flies are very smart, that they come in and then they leave by themselves. You don't even have to ask. It's like, I'm honest.
Thank you. I think, was there a question, maybe you first? Yes?
Yes, I've got a question for Alex about Pauline's work. I'm suggesting that, maybe just my idea, she might have been doing better in a social media environment when you present yourself directly to the general public or even to a targeted one via the different media.
Well, she got a lot of popular media attention. She was featured in contemporary magazines, several big spreads in contemporary magazines. But as I've said, her struggle really, Sue Tate talks about this, quite a lot, but she was, she was interviewed about her work for a specific magazine and talked about her work. But what happened was that the pictures of her were cut out and used in a soft porn mag called Titbits, which was a kind of sort of Squaddies magazine in the in the 90s. So I think that was very upsetting for her, because basically her analysis of her work was completely ignored, and she was just taken from these agency stock photos were just used. So she was constantly battling with that.
That's quite nasty, but surely she had somebody to protect her.
Not really. I mean, not really at that time, because I think that she had to deal with that kind of stuff all the time, and she often said that she said that one of my problems is that I'm just not taken seriously by most men. I mean, it wasn't true of everybody, but I mean, it was a big problem for her throughout her life, and particularly because she was involved in kind of the more despised ends of pop culture. I mean, the sort of Herbert Reed end of art criticism would never have taken. I mean, I'll give you a specific example. One of her ex-boyfriends suggested to one of the key people at the Royal College that she would be a very good editor of Arc. Now, Arc had an international distribution. It was a very important art magazine during the 50s, and the kind of guy who was in charge of appointing the editors said, no, we could not possibly ever have somebody who looked like that as editor of Arc magazine. So she just featured in some of the ads in the magazine. It always had to be a male editor. You see, she just wasn't. I mean, because she looked the way she looked, she wasn't taken seriously as seriously as her male peers. But on the other hand, it got her a lot of media exposure, but of the wrong kind very often. Are you with me? So it was a typical kind of early 60s dilemma, really. I think that's one of the reasons why she identified with the Profumo affair thing so much. Because, I mean, Christine Keeler was much, much more vulnerable than she was, and she got caught in that kind of trap too.
Okay, thank you. And in the front row.
Yeah. My question is for Alex and you. Since you're in educational institutions working, it seems like we're dealing with three different characters from different generations. One body, I just read how she died, and the way she's died, it's almost art itself. So it seems like she was someone who was living an art kind of scenario anyway, whatever she did. And now we're talking about Niyaz, who I've just been doing a lot of research about his work, writing about his work. He seems to be a really restless character. I mean, not necessarily trained as an artist, but an artist. And also a child with autism, if I was correct. These three people communicate through art. I mean, that's their way of, how to describe their identity to the rest of the world. So for you, as people who are in the educational system, my question is, do you think an educational institution is capable of creating artists out of people who pay tuition fees to go to school to become artists, or artists are just born artists? You can, direct them towards, learning about techniques and learning about, instruments and stuff. But how artists are made?
I can offer my humble opinion.
Sure.
I would say, I'd probably quote Joseph Beuys and say, well, everyone's an artist, but maybe not everyone's fashionable. So what an art school does is kind of bring you into contemporary discourse. And you may have people that are ahead of the time, behind the time, who may never receive recognition. By my interpretation, they're still artists. It's just whether you were lucky enough that your style, your moment coincides with a public that's ready to receive it. But I think that art schools do turn out, they can mold people into a particular style, but it's not always interesting. On the positive side, I think that it's less about training and more about discipline. So often an art school environment is, just giving you the space to do what you do, and to have exchange with peers that are interesting and critique. But we're looking at an exhibition with two artists that are not formally trained. Bonham-Carter was, so it's.
But even Pauline Botti had difficulty getting to the Royal Academy.
No, Royal College. Yeah.
But do you think if she had gone into that college, she would have become a better artist?
Well, I mean, I'm a cultural historian, really. I mean, so I'm interested in. I was interested in the kind of cultural and social and political environment, really, of the RCA during that period. I mean, it was one of the interesting things about the Royal College, and particularly the RCA during that period, was the fact that the staff, particularly in the painting school, were typically so kind of what we might call plummy and conservative, created a perfect thing to hit against. So you had a generation, I mean, that year, you had a generation coming up from provincial art schools, often, not always from working class backgrounds, many of whom had done national service, right? Who reacted very strongly against this older, tweed-jacketed, briar pipe puffing group of people picking away at woodcuts of roses. And because they were bringing a new kind of culture with them, and that created a very explosive atmosphere within which a lot of people thrived. And she was one of them. And she came out of that. I mean, that would have been a fantastic time to be at art school. And British art schools, as I'm sure you know, in the 50s and 60s were the crucibles of so much contemporary culture. I mean, name a successful pop group of the 60s and 70s who didn't go to art school. And the link between that and the visual arts and television and film in Britain, I mean, they were the cultural powerhouses, and she was part of that. She was part of that scene. I don't like this idea that somehow she was kind of victimized. I mean, she was a product of that unique British art school system, during that period, which, despite the fact that it may have seemed rather stuffy, provided a wonderful space for people to develop creatively. But that was part of the zeitgeist at that time as well. It was very, very different to the scene now. If Pauline Botti came along now, I wonder whether or not she would have done well in the university sector, or whether anyone would have heard of her. Do you see what I mean? I mean, it's that who can tell? She was a product of her time.
Yes.
Just to build up on that point, and a question to you, Natalia, or to Markus, well, through you. What are your plans for Markus's pool? Are you thinking of giving him to, an art school further down? Because he's 12 now, so we're thinking, what, in 6 years' time? What's the plan?
Well, it's very difficult. I think that this question is connected to the previous. So I think with the usual artist, education gives kind of a tool through which you can express your ideas. And Markus also often asks for a tool, but it's very difficult to offer it to him. For instance, you can tell him there is such a wonderful way as mosaic and offer him to do it, but he would immediately say no. And if you just keep pushing a little bit more, that's it, he's closing. He's not talking to you, he's not participating in the class or whatever it is, and perhaps he's not going to do any art during the next week, not as a protest, but because it is kind of traumatic for him to be pushed. And so far, Markus has been participating in exhibitional life in Moscow since he was 7. So already from that time, he is asking for these tools. So he's asking to help him. And whenever we tried some schools, it was very, very sad each time. So he was running away, he was crying, he had hysterics, and he was not ready to participate. So we did it this way. Our friends, artists, they are coming to our place and they show him what he demands. So I think that working with special people, you have to pay attention to their potential, ask what they need, and then have. Of course, I would like him to learn how to talk about his ideas more clear, because this is very important to bring your idea and your concept to the viewers. But so far, I cannot even imagine how to do that. I mean, Markus is so much like you can deal with him playing his rules. You cannot install your rules dealing with him. So it is a very big and difficult challenge for us. I'm thinking about trying a different model that I go to study for being an artist, and everything which I learn I'm going to translate into Markus's language so that he can take what he wants from that. But so far, it's not easy to find even such a way. So it's a good and very difficult question for us. Thank you.
Thank you. We probably have time for one more question. Any further questions?
I have a very obvious, I think, question.
Yeah.
It's quite obvious, but to Natalia, to Niyaz, and Alex, maybe you can channel what Pauline may answer to this. Do you think that without these challenges or hardships or unique kind of situations in life, would you all have become artists? Would you be artists at that point without it's quite the marginalization?
Who wants to take it? Natalia, you want to take that first?
Well, I think that each of us can be an artist, in fact. So it's just you have to find potential and to work with what is there inside. But of course, your story forms you so much that it's interesting now to hear these 3 stories, which are so different, but they have something in common. And I think like an artist should see what is inside, what is the most difficult, and maybe what is the most touching him, and try to talk about it. And perhaps this will find a better reflection from the viewers, so they would really feel that this is something which really bothers you. So I think challenges are good for artists.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if Niyaz wants to address the question.
Если вот все, что как бы случилось в жизни до этого, если бы этого всего не было, стали ли вы все равно художником?
Понимание художником, под художником что имеется?
Ну, творили ли вы картины?
Я откуда знаю, я не могу сказать, что выдумать буду.
He says, I'm not sure.
Если бы я откуда, я не знаю, что бы я делал.
because I don't know what I would have done. Would any of you know who you would be now without looking at your own past and see the journey, what you've been through? And I'm working at the time, and at this time, this is something I like doing, and it's really interesting, and it's my life. So I couldn't have changed it. So yeah. If speaking abstractly, it might be a different answer. If I would speak abstractly, I might scare you all away or attract you, but I don't think I want to do that, so yes.
Alex, I think you may have addressed this, but I'm wondering if you...
Well, it's difficult. I mean, I never knew Pauline Boty, and so I'm dealing with all of this at kind of second or third hand, but one of the things that strikes me about her was that she was, a very self-confident, determined person who benefited from a fantastic art school system and was in the right place at the right time. The only problem that she had was the patriarchy. And as I say, I think had she lived longer, I think that she would have really become a very important figure, in the British art world. I mean, she was a pioneer of a new generation of women artists. Okay,
I think that's a good moment to bring this to a close. So I'd like to say thank you so much to each of our panelists, Natalia and Markus. Thank you so much for joining us. And Niyaz and our translator, thank you for your contributions, and Alex as well. And thank you.
Thank you.